sheet you have in front of you, this is a sheet I've used for many, many years now with students. It's what I termed a coverall. Basically, when I used to revise as a student, what I used to do is I used to write everything on sheets of paper in bubbles and things. I then used to go on a walk and try and remember as much of the things as I could. And what I found was I couldn't remember certain material, but I could remember where it was on my page. So I could think, oh, it's halfway down, it was on the right-hand side, what was that name and point? And so I thought from there, a lot of students revise not just what it says, but what part of the page it's on. So this is what this is designed to help you with. It's designed to help you actually see the structure of essays, see how you actually formulate answers, and how to order and structure things. Are we all right, girls? You all right? That's fine. All right, so top first box, you need to write quite small. There are post-it notes available if you run out of space. This is for summary only. This is summary. So, first box is for the Peterson et al. Quote. So the first box is for the first slide.
Is this online?
Yes, no, it's online. Yeah. So, Peterson et al. Can somebody remind me, what does et al. Stand for? And all, super, or and others. So Peterson, the book is actually on the bookshelf. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It says, in Reason and Religious Belief, it defines a religious experience as one where a person has or believes they have had an encounter with God. In your essays, you would have to explore why that quote is important, what it means. So, for example, it looks at how it's the person's own belief. It's not saying it is God, it's saying it's their belief in God. And so, in an essay, you could then explore why is that quote interesting. I mean, it's specifically to God. So what about other faiths? Is it still including other faiths? It also still leaves open the possibility of it's just a belief they have, doesn't mean it's true. Also within that box, so you do just spread it out, use that box as much as you need. This is where you would start an essay. I certainly would go in an introduction. Religious experiences are revelations. That's a very, very important word to use. It's a word you would use throughout an answer. What it means is that knowledge is gained about God that would otherwise not be known. Why is that important? Because it's not just gaining knowledge of God. You read the Bible, that's not a revelation. It's gaining new knowledge. It's gaining knowledge you wouldn't otherwise know. So in the case, for example, of Saint Bernadette, she got a revelation because she found the spring that would otherwise not have been known. I'm going to move it on in a sec. We are going to have to go through this quite quick because, as you can see with the sheets, there's a long way to go. So this is about summarising your key points. Louisa, go on.
There is things like in the Bible when God's talking to people through various ways. Like, do they count as like religious experiences and revelation?
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime when God speaks to people or communicates, so for example when the burning bush, exactly, so they're gaining, so when the burning bush, that was God talking to Moses saying go to Egypt and free your people. He gained the revelation of I need to go to Egypt and talk to the Pharaoh. So yeah, all of that's revelation. What the revelation is not is when you read it as a believer. That's then not a revelation because that's not new knowledge, but when it actually happened to them firsthand, then it was new knowledge. So yeah, very good question. Sam?
If it's not a revelation, is it not a religious experience?
Yes, I think that's a very good way of saying it, that you need, for a religious experience, you need that revelation, because obviously it links in with William James's noetic quality, so you have to gain new knowledge of God.
Yeah, so if I see God, and he appears to me, and he tells me, Who reads out the Bible, that's already known, then that's not religious experience.
If God read you the Bible, but you would gain new knowledge of God in that God then exists. So even if he was reading the Bible, you would still be like, oh, God. So you would still gain that. Yeah, because that's the sort of conversation you'd have with God. Alfie.
But does it still count? Like St. Teresa of Avila was Christian before she...
Oh yeah, no, there doesn't have to be conversion account.
No,
So
I mean, so she had like an assumed knowledge of what's going on.
yeah,
But
I think.
it's just confirmation of Christian.
Again, I think with St. Teresa, that's a very good question, but she still gained, maybe not new knowledge then, but she actually gained more of a feeling or a recognition or something within herself with the spear to the side and all the things that happened to her. That again would have been knowledge beyond what she knew as way of God can be experienced. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so the box underneath, you have a small box and an arrow and then two linked boxes. So the first thin box is for corporate religious experiences, and then the three. If you get asked, what's up, Xantia?
I was wondering.
So the long thin one, the first one, we always go from the left-hand side. So always go from your left across. So left-hand side box is for that bit there. Absolutely essential that you know what corporate means. They could ask you that in an exam. Critically assess a corporate religious experience. That would be a blessing of a question. If you don't know what corporate means or you fluff it up, you will fail. There is nowhere to hide with a question like this. Corporate means group. The three that we studied was Toronto, Blessing, Whirling, Dervish and Lords.
What actually is the Lord's one? Is that not where the girl goes to the cave and all that?
No, that's St. Bernadette.
Right.
So St. Bernadette sees the Virgin Mary who says, dig a hole. Lords is what people go to today and have religious experiences. So thousands upon thousands of people go, they queue, they go into the shrine now where the blessed water is, often with very, very rare diseases, very, very poorly, and it's believed that some people, miracles happen, that some people come out cured. The box next to it, with the arrow, the bigger of the two, is for Anthony Fleur's leaky buckets argument. This is the idea that collecting together a series of weak arguments, so thousands of people in Toronto blessing, hundreds of people going to Lords every day, just because you have lots of arguments doesn't mean you have a strong, convincing conclusion that God exists. You just have lots of weak arguments. A bit like having 10 leaky buckets. What that means is you have 10 buckets with holes in them. It doesn't make one good bucket. You just have 10 rubbish buckets. His point meaning it doesn't matter how many accounts you have if none of them have any substance.
Is the 10 leaky buckets example from...
His. Yes, correct. So the 10 leaf buckets is Anthony Fleur's. You can use it in an exam. You would need to make sure you do explain it though. More importantly, as it says on the slide, it should be, is this fair, not if this fair. Is this fair? How can this criticism be used against the arguments above? So you would have to apply it against the Toronto Blessing or the Whirling Dervish. But you also need to weigh up, is it fair in what he's saying? I think it's a bit unfair. If I was going to argue it, I think it's a bit of a cruel approach, but cruel doesn't mean wrong. So you need to evaluate it. Do you agree with him? Some of you will think, yeah, definitely. Some of you would. So again, it's that engagement. The little box next to it is for J.L. Mackey. He admits that sometimes people unintentionally mislead or exaggerate accounts. Which is fair. Sometimes people do get a little bit carried away. Your highlighters are on your table just so you can pick out your key words, your key names, anything of importance that you'd like to. Okay, so Box underneath is the first of a number of Richard Swinburne's. So this next box is for the next slide. You need to know about personal testimonies. Why have I labelled the slides corporate and personal? Because this is what the examiners might ask you. So they might say to you, critically assess personal testimonies of religious experience. The personal ones are Numinous, Saint Teresa and Saint Bernadette. Be careful with Numinous. Why? Because you don't have any specific examples of it unless you research them, so it makes your answer look a bit vague and waffly. So you really do need to have in for Numinous the Rudolf Otto, the Mysterium Facinas, the Mysterium Tremendum, and the feelings that come with it. Or link Numinous in with the other two.
What is numinous?
So Numinous is a feeling of awe and wonder. But you can often get not only the wonder and the feelings of, oh, wow, also a fear. So St. Teresa not only felt feelings of, wow, this is amazing, she also had fear, but probably feared because she had malaria and was going to die. Within that same box, you then have Richard Swinburne's principle of credulity. Testimony should be taken at face value unless there is significant evidence to prove them wrong. So what it means is you should believe what people tell you. If your friend, for example, came up to you and went, oh, you'll never guess what, just had a conversation with God, and you think, actually, this friend's normally really truthful, normally don't dramatise things, so you say, oh, tell me more about it, you know, why do you feel like that, you would accept what they say, even though it's a bit bizarre, you'd accept what they say. Listen, if you know that they are totally melodramatic, they are always making things up, and they're a big Facebook fibber, then you probably go, oh yeah, convo with God, definitely. So it's about taking what someone says at face value unless there's significant evidence to prove otherwise. In the case of the three on the board, St. Teresa of Avila, for example, had malaria. Pretty significant evidence against her. That's fine, don't have to worry about the last bit. They're just questions for you to consider.
Are we done with that box now?
Yep, done with that box. So as you can see, we can get through a sheet quite quickly, but it separates it into manageable chunks. So the next few boxes are numbered. The numbers go with the 5 ways of Richard Swinburne's argument. So each one goes in its own box. So the numbered box goes with the numbered point. The Richard Swinburne's book, you can just either put in the first box or put down the side or put in the gap next to where it says number 5. Doesn't matter where you put it. Richard Swinburne, In the Existence of God. What an original title. 1979. I hope Richard Swinburne doesn't now listen to this. Provides 5 ways to categorise personal testimonies. The first category is experience of God through a common public sensory object. Common, happens every day. Public, out in the open. Sensory, based on what your senses are telling you, your 5 senses. What that means is you might see God in a sunset or an ocean. These are not God, but a way God can be encountered. Can someone tell me what we normally call that? Numinous? Yeah, well done. Please write any extras as well on your sheet. So where I say e.g. numinous, write that on your sheet. Box 2, experience of gone through unusual public sensory object. Exactly the same, apart from it's a bit out of the norm. Unusual. Bush burning. Virgin Mary visiting you. Not of the norm. do the first side, then we'll have a brain break and do an activity. Number 3, the experience of God, but it's private. But you can still describe it in normal language. The person might claim to experience God through a dream or a vision. I don't know if you remember the Toronto blessing clip, for example. I know my groups watched it last year. But she says how she dreamed of God visiting her, and he had a tie on with a wolf and then said, howl at the moon for us. And so then she had to go into her church and howl like a wolf. Whilst questionable why God would make somebody howl like a wolf and what the revelation is there, the point is that she experienced God through a dream. And that God wears a tie. I'm sure Mary Daly would like that. On that note, one of the things that we're going to do at the end, or it might be February half-term homework, depends, you have to make links between topics. You get your top marks, your A's and your A stars, by making links synoptically amongst the different topic areas. So if you're hearing this and you think, oh, that links into person of Jesus, or oh, this links into Bonhoeffer or Augustine or Mary Daly and her views that, you know, God is male and God's male wearing a tie, whatever it might be, you have to start making links between your topics.
How would you integrate them into an essay without sounding like you're going off topic?
By linking it back to the question. As long as everything's linked back to the question, you're using them in an evaluative sense for or against what you're arguing. So in the sense of, I know it's not a very good example, so you wouldn't use it in your example, the God wearing a tie, you then bring in the Mary Daly to say how that argument, you know, that doesn't work because you're, again, personifying God as man, so you just use her as a quick sideline evaluative point. Yeah. Number 4 is Teresa of Avila. You don't have to worry about the quote, but the quote is on the PowerPoint if you want it. Experience of God through private sensations that cannot be described in normal sensory language. This is your ineffable experiences. Saint Teresa knew what happened to her. She couldn't quite put into words how she knew it. So she says that I was conscious of him, for neither with the eyes of the body nor those of the soul did I see anything, but it was not an imaginary vision. So she knew she saw something, she knew she felt and experienced it, but she couldn't put into words how she knew it. Number 5, for the 5th box, is the experience of God that is not mediated by any sensations, no senses involved at all. Meditation, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. Can anybody tell me with number 5, experience of God that is not mediated by any sensations, what religious experience example have we looked at that you could use for number 5? So think about it. Number 5 is asking for an experience of God that doesn't involve senses through higher intuition or meditation. Which religious experience does that link with? Word in Dervish, thank you, Louisa. your sheet, you have 2 gaps next to number 5. You need to write down these 3 things. First one is, do not number them in your exam. You do not need to number them. The numbers are me. So just write it down next to the box number 5. You have 2 gaps. Do not number them. Number 2, under no circumstances use all 5. Number 3, they don't have to go in this order. No numbers, no order, no all 5. So what you do with these is this. If you're talking about Saint Teresa, you then say, this is supported by Richard Swinburne in The Existence of God, who explains that an experience can be with God through private sensations that cannot be described in normal sensory language. William James would explain this as ineffable. The problem with this, however, is, so you would use this as an essay filler. You would not need all 5, you will need the one that is relevant to the example that you're using. If you say, the second one of Richard Swinburne's, the examiner will think, the second one of what? No, the numbers are there to help you. You don't need to mention them. Is everybody all right with that? Yeah. Alfie?
Why do we do all 5?
Because it would take far too long. You have 40 minutes and this is pure description. Yeah. If you use all 5, all scattered around your essays with loads of different examples, fine. But this is something you won't get many marks for, because you get marks for the evaluation. So I just show an examiner you've got the knowledge. You can do that by just using 1. Yeah. All right. Long thin box underneath is just for those 3. That is just says conversion, St. Paul, Nicky Cruz, Guru Nanak. That's it for the box underneath. So the box above where it says William James. So that's it for that one. Corporate, personal, conversion. Those are all the stories that we've covered and looked at. All right, the next slide is quite a chunky slide. There's a lot of points on it, but the box is slightly bigger. Not massive, I'm sorry. All right, William James then. Don't worry about that. William James, 1842 to 1910. In the varieties of religious experience, an examiner would expect you to know the title of the name of his book. Don't put variety of religious experience. It'd be a very short book if it's just the variety. It's varieties of religious experience. Not particularly hard to remember, so it would be that need to be there. So this is in the box with the William James next to it. Verification, that's fine. That was just an explanation. Self-authenticating then is the first bit. The experience the individual has is real and therefore is important to them. It's self-authenticating. Self, person, personal. Authenticating, authentic.
Are we not writing the first bit?
You can if you want. It's just about verification. You know what verification means. Just prove or check, so it's just a posh word. So you can write about the verification if you want. So James says that the verification is not crucial. So yeah, drop that down. That's fine. He talks about how they're solitary. They're about individual experiences with the divine or God. William James is a fascinating individual. He is unlike pretty much any other philosopher we look at. Why? Because his aim isn't to really prove something. He's just exploring something. Now, some people don't like that. They think, well, what's the point of writing about something if you're not going to actually prove something? For him, it's not about proving whether God does or doesn't exist. A bit like the Wittgenstein idea of certain things you can never know whether they're true or false, so what's the point of trying to argue it either way? He's not trying to argue that God is true or false, or exists or doesn't exist. All he's saying is that something happens to these people, and it's true and authentic to them. That is not a trump card, the self-authenticating. What I mean by that is it's not that impressive. D-grade students can remember the self-authenticating. You need to go an awful lot further with those arguments and those ideas. So if you do mention self-authenticating, don't think, oh, got it in the bag. No, evaluate it, discuss it, explore it. You need to do something with it. Louisa?
That RE solitary bit, is that just saying that religious experiences are on your, like you're on your own?
Yes, that even if you're in a group experiencing it, even with the Toronto blessing, it's still an experience you have with God. So they're still solitary. They're still between you and God. Yeah. Or even if you're as a group, the experience you have is still personal to you.
Yeah, just, 'cause like when I was doing the revision for it, it confused me a bit.
Yeah, so that's what that means, yeah. He admitted this is not logical proof that God exists, but evidence in support of God. He calls it a psychological phenomena. The experiences are explained as part of a person's psychological makeup. They are natural, but they are central to belief. He always leaves open the possibility of God's existence. He doesn't conclude God exists. We aren't doing this with a teleological argument, for example. But he's certainly never closing that door. But he recognises there's elements of psychology there. And you've got a couple of quotes if you do have any space in your box. The purpose of religion is not God, but more life, a larger, richer, more satisfying life. That's a fabulous quote. What he's saying is, God actually isn't the reason. It's about having a better life, and that links into his arguments later about healthy soul, healthy minded. You also have religion leads to consistency, and stability. 2 words. It's a quote still. You never have any reason not to use quotes in your exam. A quote does not have to be long. You're doing really well, everyone. This is the densest part of the sheet as well. So once we've got this side done, the other side's a lot easier. Alright, I'm going to move it on in just a sec. As you can see from the remainder of the boxes on this side, you have the method, the findings, the 1 to 4 and the main conclusions. Why? Because in the past, even though the spec has changed, examiners are sometimes specific about what they want you to talk about. So they might say, critically assess the main aims and conclusions of William James. What that means is, critically assess William James. It doesn't mean just aims and conclusions. It means basically critically assess all of it. All you would do, though, is say, this is an aim, this is another conclusion, this is another aim. So sometimes they do use these words in the exam. It does mean all of it. You just have to use and drop in those words. So The method, this is this whole slide goes in that one box. William James was a psychologist. This is what makes him interesting. He isn't an atheist. He isn't coming out as a religious believer. He's a psychologist. Psychology is a science. He approaches this like a scientist. So he collects the testimonies, analyses, categorises them, and then notes the common features. Once again, don't number them. Once again, explore the strengths of that approach. It's systematic. It's methodical. It's unbiased. He noted the effects on people's lives. Why? Because he couldn't actually see the effects himself. So going on to the purple box, that is known as a pragmatic approach. Why did he only study the effects? Because it's all he could see. He was concerned with the actual practical effects on people, not supernatural speculations. So he wasn't interested in what happened to them or anything. He wanted to know, what are the effects on your life? How has your life changed? Because he could actually see those. You can never experience somebody's religious experience. You can't time it. You can't monitor it. You can't put them in a room and wait for it. They are random, spontaneous. So the effects, James could not see their actual religious experiences, but he could soon study their effects. So Alicia was still in the method aims box. Yeah.
So the numbers are them numbers?
No.
Oh, right, good.
No, sorry, yeah, that's a bit confusing. No, the numbers are for the ineffability noetic.
Right, that's good.
Xantia.
So is the purple box still in the method?
Yes, please, yeah. Yeah, so all that slides in that method and aims box, please. He looks a very intelligent man, don't you think? I think he's got a... Do we not think? I think he looks really intelligent. If he can look intelligent. At least I didn't say he was hot or something, so... The bubble at the top. I'm not trying to prove religious experiences happen or that God exists. Is very, very important. Why? Because students in the past have criticised William James for saying, why are you trying to prove God when God's unprovable or God's unfalsifiable, so, you know, this isn't proof. No, you've missed the point completely. He's not trying to prove God. He is just having a look at the evidence that's presented. You draw your own conclusions from it. Some students then say, well, that's, you know, what is the conclusion then? What's the point of researching something that you don't draw conclusions from? All right, so next box, findings. Where it says findings. The findings are these. They had profound effects on people's lives. So again, slide box, please. Life transforming, positive effects. This is very, very important. So findings are another way of saying conclusions. He found that it had a profound effect. It wasn't just a blip. Oh yeah, it happened to me. It was life transforming. And they were also positive, and people had a happier outlook on life, sense of purpose, benefits to their morality, better relationships with others. I mean, you only have to look as far as someone like Nicky Cruz, gangster mob to, you know, reformed man. Happier, positive, sense of purpose, minus killing people. So he became more of a moral person. Obviously, William James and Nicky Cruz, I don't think overlapped. He distinguished between what he called healthy-minded soul and sick soul. Healthy-minded is just open to ideas, possibilities, optimistic and hopeful. Sick-souled, cynical and sceptical. Psh, that never happened. Religious experiences tend to make people healthy-minded, open and optimistic. You can decide where Richard Dawkins falls into them. What's that?
You're saying like, for someone who's quite obviously not religious, he's quite quick to call people who don't believe it's sick.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would imply that he thinks it's healthy to believe it than not believe it.
Oh, yes, so he certainly is drawing some
Yeah.
conclusions.
I think he probably came to the conclusion he might actually be religious.
Yes, yeah. Brilliant. All right, so the number 4, oh, there we go, spin. The number 4, the 4 ways to define religious experience, these are all present in a religious experience. So I'll put the slide on and then you might want to write the top bit or that bit at the bottom just to the side of them because everything on that slide needs to go in that 1 to 4 box. This is pass-fail territory. You must mention all 4 in an exam. You can number them, that is fine. You don't have to put them all together, but they have to be there. Why? Because this is the most systematic approach to religious experiences we have. So any question on religious experience, this is religious experience. So you have to have it there. So William James concluded or argued that these are all present in religious experiences. The first is ineffable, beyond words. 2, noetic quality, you gain a revelation or knowledge of God. 3, transiency. The experience can be short-lived but has a life-transforming effect on the person. Think of Saul to St. Paul, 3 days, fish scales, then changed his life and became one of the most revolutionary founding fathers of Christian thought. Finally, 4 is passive. You are taken over and consumed. God is in control. Questions free will a bit, especially if you don't want it. The points at the bottom where it says note, I do want you to note down in the box to the side. You must know all 4 of these and you must apply them to different religious experiences. If you cannot make a link, it doesn't mean it's a criticism or that what you're talking about is not a religious experience. It just means that you might not know enough about it. So you cannot turn around and say, Toronto Blessing is not a religious experience because what's the noetic quality? No, because you don't know every single account of Toronto Blessing. You haven't interviewed all of them. You don't know. What you can argue is the revelation is unclear, so suggests, is this a religious experience or not? It's the language that you use to suppose it. Don't argue it directly. Is there any questions on those 4? You're doing really well, everyone. I know you've wrote a lot now. So, the main conclusions that he drew from his studies. The first is that the effects are real. There's a real, something that happens to them. Effects are real, causes are real. With every effect, there has to be a cause. So there has to be a real cause to the effect. If the person believes it to be God, then they believe it to be God. So this goes in the box that says main conclusions. Only 2 slides left after this. Real and true. Things that are real and true have positive effects. Things that are made up often have negative effects. Religious experiences have positive effects, so chances are, according to William James, you can maybe draw the conclusion that they are seen as real and true. Seems a bit of leap of logic to me. Just because they've got positive effects, they're real and true. Religious experiences are positive, therefore they're real. I think it's quite a gaps argument, but it was up to you how you argue it. Therefore, God is likely to be real and true, again, for those individuals. Scripture seen as the central source for churches, but William James emphasises that actually it's revelation, prayer that's important, and the notable change in behaviour is why he suggests religious experiences are inspirations. It shouldn't be Bible inspiration, it should be religious experiences inspiration. Go on.
What's the number 3 for? Is that a separate point?
No, it's just like it's just like the logic of his arguments. So he's just going into real and true, and then that's the conclusion that can be drawn from it.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So the numbers are just like the steps. William James, because he's a psychologist, does look at similarities between religious experiences and other types of experiences as well, like dreams and hallucinations. He does suggest there's a link to the subconscious ideas. That's a lovely comparison to Freud, who's going to be on the other side of the sheet. So both look at subconscious ideas. Interesting how one man concludes positives, William James, one man concludes negative. And he concludes that they're not enough to demonstrate God on their own, but suggest the existence of something larger. 2 words, great quote. Something larger. Why? Because it's open to any faith, any belief. And many people do think it might not be God, but there might be something else out there. He recognises that in that simple something larger quote. Sorry, this is hard work. Revision's not fun though. Oh, do you want to post it now? Does anybody else need a post-it note?
Yes, please.
Just going to move on. I can always bring it back if you haven't quite finished. Alright, so mystical. This is where a lot of you lost the marks in your key knowledge exam. Mystical experience, so that's all that goes into that slide. So that's what, that's what goes into that box where it says mystical. A mystical religious experience. Mysticism is direct knowledge of God, a spiritual truth or ultimate reality is revealed. This can be subjective and personal. So you've got direct knowledge, revelation, and the idea that it's subjective and personal. A mystical experience is an experience of something transcendent beyond normal awareness. This means that all religious experiences we have studied can be linked with a mystical experience. Examiners might use that word to throw you off. Critically assess a mystical religious experience and you think, whoa, what's mystical? No drama. You just need to learn that explanation, you add that into an introduction, and then you just keep bringing it back, your answer back to it all the time. It's just another word for religious experience, but it's the idea of it's with something transcendent. It's the recognition that it's mystical, it's unknown, it's something larger, beyond what you normally know. Yeah, that's next. Yeah. So to give you a little bit of substance for mystical, but as I've said, everything you've done so far can be linked to mystical, we have F.C. Happold. F.C. Happold, in his book, Mysticism, you will see you have 2 and then 3, 2, 3. Basically, the 2 boxes are the boxes there. This again is not must-know information. This is plumpers. This is essay extras. You don't need to know about the types or the aspects. Basically, just learn 1 or 2 of anything on that slide. You don't have to worry about the numbers either. The numbers again are to help you. But it does distinguish between 2 types. Mysticism of love and union, mysticism of knowledge and understanding. Love and union, being part of something bigger than ourselves. Knowledge and understanding, gaining secrets, knowledge. That's your noetic quality. 3 aspects, soul mysticism doesn't even have to involve God, just a feeling of being complete, self-fulfillment. Nature mysticism, that God is everywhere, immanent, a bit like numinous. God mysticism, the idea of your soul reuniting or joining with God. That can happen in this world or the next. Once again, you don't have to number them. You don't have to remember all of them. Even just 1 is brilliant. Why do I give you all of them? Because I don't know which one you'd want to learn.
What's the difference between a type and an aspect?
Doesn't matter.
So did he come up with 5?
No, it called them types and aspects, but it won't go against you in an exam not knowing them. So types, I think it's because he'll say the aspects go within the 1 and 2. That's what he would argue, that they're aspects
so
of...
you can have, like, mysticism, union, love.
With soul, yes.
Together.
Yeah. I imagine so. Amia?
Can you just, like, go over the 3 aspects? So I was trying to explain this when I was doing peer mentoring.
Oh, yes.
I didn't really understand
No, absolutely fine, Amir, no problem. So, soul mysticism is just about a self-fulfillment. It doesn't have to involve God or anybody else. It's just a feeling of completion, a feeling of happiness, I think, within oneself. So, soul mysticism is that revelation within yourself. Soul mysticism, it does make it difficult when the mysticism has to involve that knowledge of transcendent being, etc. But it's that connection, first of all, with yourself, and then probably next would come that connection with God. Nature mysticism means where you experience God. So it means that some people might feel the mysticism, the transcendent being through nature. So nature mysticism is like numinous, that God can be experienced everywhere, anywhere. And then God mysticism is that soul's desire to return to God, whether that's in this world finding faith, or in the next world being one with God in heaven, for example. So it's just the different types. One is personal, one is in nature and everywhere, and one is your connection directly with God. So, first of your two big boxes at the top, make sure you've got the two boxes where the hole punch is. So make sure you've got your sheet the right way round. The first one is psychological effects. So that goes in the first of the two boxes. It doesn't really matter which box you go in, but again, normally go to the left-hand side. So psychological effect, you might get a specific question in the exam that says, critically says the view that religious experiences are just psychological effect. What would you talk about? Because they are unusual, some conclude they can be interpreted as just illusions. Again, you need to explore, is that fair? Who's making the judgment? What does it mean by illusion? We know that our minds do play tricks on us, or that some children have imaginary friends, some adults might, or you might even hear voices saying your name, or sudden sense of foreboding, sudden sense of fear or fright. And so we are prone to perceptual errors. We are prone to things affecting the way that we see the world. And so maybe experiences with God or greater powers is just another example of this. Feuerbach and Freud have plenty to say about this, so they are your psychologists. So just so you can see where the slide's going. Don't forget to always keep in mind, and again, that slide's to go in that box. If you get a question on psychological effect, you have to talk about William James as our psychologist. Compare Freud and William James. Why is one negative about it, one positive about it? James, as a psychologist, keep in mind, just because it might be a psychological effect, does this mean that it's a bad thing? And then you have a great quote from Myers. That is not Myers, that is the Michael Myers picture of Halloween. So it's not that Myers. But Myers says that prayer is a vital component of the psychological well-being of many individuals. That, again, is a lovely quote. What it's saying is that it's part of people's well-being. At the end of the day, if religious experiences make you feel better, why take tablets? Why is an experience with God such a bad thing? Again, you would have to explore it in your answers. So if you've got a question on psychological, this is what you would start with. You just start outlining what psychological means. You would introduce Freud and Feuerbach. You know that you talk about William James as well as the counter. You could use the Myers quote to start you off. Be warned, Wednesday's lesson, we're going to try those introductions. You know, where I set you a question and you've got 7 minutes to write an intro. We are going to have a go at that on Wednesday as well. It will be on religious experience. All right, box to the side is for Mr. EUE or Mr. Feuerbach. Please spell his name right. F-E-U-E. Back. Feuerbach says religion is an illusion, it's a fiction people mistake for reality. And he says that because we feel alienated in our lives, we project these wishes onto God. So again, this slide, that box. If we were able to reach our potential, we wouldn't need religion. He says that society will evolve and religion will disappear, and it's an invention of our human mind. If I was a student approaching my exam, I would find Feuerbach brilliant. Why? Because pretty much every single one of those bullet points you can either agree with or disagree with. Every single one of them points raises a valuation. So we continue with our next critic, Freud. We've done Feuerbach. He is our other critic psychologist. We've got William James on the other side. Freud is your main one. The two boxes in the triangle underneath is where we're going for Freud. So this slide is for the next box. So you have got quite a bit of space. Do spread it out. He was a very, very famous psychologist. However much you wish to criticise Freud, that is fine, but you need to remember and recognise what an impact he had on psychology. He was the founder of psychoanalysis as well. That's the idea of come lay on my couch and tell me all your problems. That one correct? Yeah. He explains away he explains away religion even as purely a psychological phenomenon, a cushion from the harsh realities. So it's what we use as our comfort blanket, it's what we use to comfort ourselves. And then this is the bit that a lot of you missed out in your key knowledge exam. It is an obsessional neurosis. That's what he calls religion. That's very, very important. A neurosis is something that describes problems that people experience in life, such as traumas that are repressed in the mind and developed into obsessive neurosis in adulthood, such as repetitive behaviour. So it's the idea that a neurosis is something that doesn't quite make sense. It's a neurosis. It doesn't have logic. A bit like hare's blicks, really. It's a neurosis. It doesn't really make sense. It's obsessional because it's something you believe you have to keep doing or something bad will happen. Repetitive behaviours such as OCD. People believe unless they turn the light switches on and off 3 times, something bad might happen. Or if they don't check their doors locked 5 times, somebody will burgle them. And so this becomes a neurosis. It's not logical. It becomes an obsession and they have to do it. In the case of religion, you can see this in many, many cases. You've got the idea of they have to pray before they go to sleep. Otherwise, so Christians say a prayer, so in case they die in their sleep, they want to make sure they go to heaven and not purgatory. The idea of praying 5 times a day towards Mecca. These ideas are obsessional neuroses, and they believe if they don't do it, something bad will happen. So belief in God is an obsessional neurosis that religion satisfies. We are satisfied by religion. That's all that goes in that box. Okay, your second box in the middle then. Freud's concepts of the mind, again, very straightforward. We're quite happy with these ideas. This is probably the main part of religious experience that we are actually very competent with. The mind for Freud has three parts: the id, the ego and the superego. The id is what develops first in your psychosexual stage. The id is the baby principle. It's the me, want, greed. It's about the human instincts and desires. The ego is what is shaped by external influences, traumas, education, upbringing. And the superego is part of the ego, but is the rational. It makes decisions. And the superego is where your conscience is found. Can someone tell me and remind me, what is this very familiar to? Yeah, excellent. Plato's three parts of the soul. So Plato had the rational, spiritive and appetitive, the appetitive being the body's needs, very, very similar to the id. Okay, the next one, the triangle, is of course for the iceberg. So please will you just fill out the triangle on your sheets according to the iceberg. So you do the water cutting at the top of it. So the idea that it's your conscious and unconscious mind. Right down at the pit, at the bottom of the iceberg, obviously this is just a triangle, but at the bottom of it is where your unconscious mind, your love of your mother is. So the love of the mother going through the psychosexual the middle stage where the boy, so the Oedipus complex, the boy falls in love with his mother. That is at the deepest parts of your conscious mind. I'll leave it like that because I think there's an old timer on it. The conscience then is what's built up of the guilt of disappointing your parents, and the superego is what's linked with this idea of society's behavioural expectations. And so it's the idea that above the water is what you're conscious, is where you're conscious. So we're all conscious now. Hopefully anyone's not asleep. So that's the idea that this is your conscious mind. Just underneath the water is where you dream. And so sometimes you dream things that are very close to reality, or things that you're worrying about come in your dreams. Why? Because they're your sub or pre-conscious mind. And then at the depths of your iceberg is your deepest, darkest memories, and no amount of psychoanalysis, no amount of therapy, no amount of hypnosis will ever get to that point. If you want to call it the iceberg analogy, that is absolutely fine. An examiner will know what you're talking about. So just fill in the triangle as best as you can. You then have two boxes underneath, one's for strengths, one's for weaknesses. We are going to be able to go through the rest of this sheet now quite quickly. It's quite straightforward. So two boxes and split them, strengths and then weaknesses. The strengths of Freud, he is the founder of psychoanalysis. We still use psychoanalysis today. He was absolutely fundamental in the development of dreams, the mind, the conscious, subconscious and unconscious ideas. Don't forget as well, William James talks about subconscious ideas. This is psychology. Freud is one of the leading men within psychological development. And so you have to remember that. It is clear that our parents' and environment do affect our morals and ethical ideas. However, he had highly flawed data. He, for example, took most of the idea of the Oedipus complex from little Hans. He also looked at little Hans's dreams, things like that, and took a lot of his ideas of love of his mother and fear of his father from one case study. It's unethical, it's unscientific, and it's flawed. What about children from single parent families or modern families? What I mean by modern families is homosexual parents, two gay dads, two lesbian mothers. This idea that Freud would imply that they're immoral because they don't come from mother and father, that they don't have the boys don't have the father to copy and the mother to fall in love with. Clearly that is illogical. Freud lived in a time and a culture where that was the norm. We live in a very different time now. Don't people have more control over their actions and decisions? It really does remove that element of free will. Aren't we a bit more in control than just an obsessional neurosis? And finally, is it bordering on reductionist, reducing us down to just, oh, that's because of your id, or that's because of your superego, or that's just because of your parents? Is it reducing it down to two simple ideas? If anyone's got any questions, do ask. Don't forget, with each of those bullet points, you cannot just list them. You need to explain and explore each one. You need to say what it implies. You need to link it back to the question. You need to defend against it if you can. You, of course, need to add your critical words in there. As they stand, they are not enough as evaluation. They are just stating evaluative points. You need to explore them and say whether it's makes his argument vague or absurd. Excellent. Okay, box underneath then. First box underneath, you're going to have 3 is just for that top part. So the top part is for the first of the 3 boxes. This is your physiological effect. Please look at the spelling. The H is much earlier than in psychological. You will literally leave your exam crying if you come out and everyone's like, oh, I talked about St. Teresa's malaria and St. Paul's dehydration. You're like, oh, I talked about Freud because I thought it said psychological and it said physiological. You will flat out fail. You will get a big fat 0. Please make sure, do not go in that exam and start jumping for joy and thinking, yes, 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 it's psychological, and read again and go, no, it's physiological. Please be so, so careful. The words look very similar. They have extremely different implications for what you write. So, physiological, physio. If you have a physio, it's doing something to your body. This is how the body affects you. Meg, go on.
This is just the first.
So this is just the first of the 3, yes please. Yeah, so all of that's in the first. This is when things like drink, drugs, tiredness, illness, depression, fasting, dehydration all change the way we think and experience the world. One mental state may deeply affect a physical state. So lack of sleep brings you hallucinations. That list is long, but at the end of the day, you could really link it to a lot of different accounts that we look at, a lot of the different religious experiences. And this is saying that there is a perfectly simple bodily explanation. And this is where someone like William of Ockham comes in. He's a 14th century English logician. So he looks at language, and he's very, very famous for saying entities must not be multiplied beyond necessity. Basically, go for the simplest solution that covers all the bases. Look for the simplest answer, and this is called Occam's razor. Often you will hear this in crime scene shows or something like that. They say, let's look, what is Occam's razor in this? It's about looking at the simplest solution that covers all grounds.
The PowerPoint on that is the slides on the I don't know why. The one after Friday's evaluation. Our senses is it just
Oh, go to the next one. Keep going. Might be the other side of Alston.
that's it.
And that's the one on YouTube.
Yeah, is there a second one? It's fine, it's just a struggle to see that one.
I'll update the one on YouTube.
Right,
That's
okay.
yeah. Meg, what I can do is I can just send you this. If you send me an email afterwards, I'll send you this. That's fine. I don't know why it's different on YouTube. And you didn't come across it earlier in the PowerPoint, did you? Because I did move a few of the slides around. No, that's fine. A lot of students use Occam's razor to support religious experiences. I, however, think it's more logical to use it as a criticism. What's the simplest explanation for the Toronto blessing? Probably plane fumes. What's the simplest explanation of St. Teresa? She had malaria. What's the simplest solution of St. Paul on the road to Damascus in a desert for a multitude of days, and everybody else in the experience sees it as well? Dehydration. There's a simple solution, and nearly in all cases, the simplest solution is something linked with the body. Even St. Bernadette could because of a poor diet, and that's where we're going in a second. So middle box is for Bertrand Russell, so we've got it nice and spread out. The last box is for your poor diet, so you've got 3 clear boxes for 3 clear parts. Bertrand Russell, in his autobiography, I highly recommend Bertrand Russell, I really do. He's a fabulous writer, really approachable as well. He remarked upon Beatrice Webb's focus on fasting. Beatrice Webb talked about fasting, and he said, if you eat too little, you see visions, and if you drink too much, you see snakes. Basically, of course, you're going to see things if you're doing something to affect the way your body and your mind work. So if you do fast, of course you're going to see things because you're starving. Obviously, or quite malnourished anyway, but not quite starving. Interestingly, there was years and years ago now, and most people can never even remember it. It was one of those like Channel 4 reality TV shows, and it basically was where these people couldn't go to sleep, and so the winner was the person that could stay awake the longest. So it was like a Big Brother house, but where people couldn't sleep. And they had to cancel it halfway through because people started to show serious aggression, they started to show suicidal tendencies, they started to hallucinate, and they were just like, yeah, this is not really good TV, we're going to get sued. And so they actually cancelled it because it wasn't possible for people to stay awake past kind of 3 days. Serious side effects started to happen. The last one is poor diet. Delirium tremens is caused by vitamin B deficiency. This is often part of what happens to alcoholics when they have alcohol withdrawal. That's why if you're an alcoholic, you often get put on drips and things because of a lack of vitamin B, because alcohol has a lot of vitamin B. Some scholars argue that an aesthetics diet, an aesthetic is a monk or a nun, or somebody that has a very pious, very bread and water diet, lack vitamin B, so this could explain their hallucinations, their paranoia, their visions and voices. Saint Bernadette was from an extremely poor family. She might have been suffering from delirium tremens. That's why she saw the Virgin Mary 18 times, because it was an ongoing dietary problem. It might go on. Third one, yes please Daniel. It might not have been. It might have been the Virgin Mary she saw, but Occam's razor again would say poor diet, Virgin Mary. What's the simplest solution? Again, it's the language you use to suggest it. This could suggest it's a poor diet, not it was a poor diet. Always use suggestive language, because we don't know. Maybe it was the Virgin Mary.
Does it mean the simplest solution being that the dehydrated animal?
Yeah.
Is that what it means?
Yeah, but people often use Occam's razor to support religious experiences as well. But I see more students using it incorrectly than correctly, so I think it's better as a critic. And so yes, so what's more logical? St. Paul on the road to Damascus, or Saul on the road to Damascus, heard and saw Jesus, all that he was dehydrated. The simplest solution is probably he was dehydrated. Yeah. The only one that I've ever found in the years that I've taught this, and it was an old spec area that you don't have to do. In the old spec religious experience, we used to do stigmata. Stigmata, I'm really gutted that you don't have to do stigmata anymore because it's fascinating. But basically, a stigmatic, a genuine stigmatic, the wounds cannot heal even if you go to a doctor, whereas often people are trying to self-inflict wounds because then the Pope calls you, the Pope saints you if you are believed to be a real stigmatic. So often people self-inflict the wounds of Christ, but they heal. Real stigmatics, their wounds don't heal, they stop bleeding on their own, science can't stop the bleeding. The blood is often recognised as a different type from the person's own blood, and it runs up their arm. Can anybody tell me why you think a stigmatic's blood would run up their arm rather than down over their hand? It's a really weird idea if you can work it out. Louisa? No, nice logic though, looking up to heaven, I like that. Again, your logic with the heart idea, the idea is much more sinister. If you put your arms in the air and the blood runs that way, Jesus been crucified, so the blood ran up. And so in a stigmatic's case, yeah, the blood would run up your arm.
I was going to say that, but I was like, oh, I thought that would be if you're upside down, but Jesus wasn't upside down.
Yeah, Jesus wasn't crucified upside down, but still that'd probably just drip off. Yeah. And so in stigmatic cases, that is believed. It's very hard to find evidence for stigmatics, but that's the only one where with Occam's razor, it's kind of like they don't heal on their own. The blood's a different type. The blood runs against gravity. At what point do you say, yeah, this is a bit odd, it might be God? And so that's actually the only time I've ever found Occam's razor even remotely works. I think in
any actual documented cases of it?
yeah, there's been quite a few recent Pope Padre Pio, not Pope, sorry, Padre Pio was a stigmatic, and he had sermons where people would, wounds just would randomly bleed.
Why did he not die then? Bleeding all the time.
Because I think with the stigmatics, it's only the spear to the side that would ever kill you. It doesn't bleed continuously. It stops bleeding, so it doesn't kill you. But it's the spear to the side that would kill you, and that's obviously what they used to do to see if the person on the cross was dead.
Is it just the
And breaking
arms
knees.
that have gone on the deck? If you
I don't know about the feet. I just know it's no, because the feet would the feet were at the bottom, so it would so it was just the arms with them being like that.
people with haemophilia, if they bleed, it doesn't clot. You don't stop bleeding. It's like not
Yeah, haemophiliacs. Yeah. Right. So. Last few slides. The box underneath the login one is for Alston. Alston is fantastic. I really like Alston's point here. Alston says that our sense experience is generally reliable. Why should we not believe what our senses tell us, even if what it's telling us is a religious experience? There is no reason to reject an explanation just because the explanation is unusual. My senses are telling me now that it looks quite nice and fresh and bright outside. I turn round, oh, there's the Virgin Mary. Why are my senses right in looking out the window, but they're not right because I see the Virgin Mary? I didn't, by the way. But if I did, why do we believe our senses in some cases and not others? Yes, it would be unusual to see the Virgin Mary. Yes, it would be out of the normal and out of the ordinary. But why do you suddenly not believe your senses when you believe them all other times? It doesn't show that religious experiences are God, just that it's not fair to simply reject religious experiences as illogical or irrational. So, once again, Alston is not saying God exists. Alston is not saying this is proof of God. He's just saying you cannot dismiss it as evidence. You, of course, could use someone like Plato against this to say how our senses are quite deceiving. That's fine. You could even use physiological against him to say how easy it is for our senses to be deceived with things like colds. But I still think Alston has a really good point. 2 slides left. We're doing brilliant for time. Yeah. Once again though, what's on that slide is not a valuation. You have to explore it, you have to apply critical words. So I verbally said how strongly I think Alston has a good point. So if it was my essay, I would say, interestingly, Alston presents that why should we not believe our senses when most other times we do? This is because, just because it's a religious experience doesn't mean that we should automatically doubt it when we trust our senses all of the time. Obviously, that's not a very good sentence, but it's about applying why you think something works or is interesting and then adding a because, explaining it, exploring it, justifying it. You might think that's absolute rhubarb. Argue it. That's why you will not find a valuation on the PowerPoint in its completion, because it's about how you see things. You see it very differently from me. You see things based on your own opinions of religion as well. But don't forget, never use I think. It is not academic. You have got to pose these points whilst avoiding I. Even just putting this could be seen as is fine. You don't have to have an I think this is because, or just this could be seen as because. You don't ever have to use I in a sentence. You will not at university. I think the first time you ever bring I into it is when you do PhD. which is when you become a doctor for 5 years in a subject area, you do your own research, that's when you start using I, not when you've studied it for 2 weeks at college. Okay, box underneath, you have 2 boxes, again, 1 strengths, 1 weaknesses. The strengths, this is general religious experience now, this is just rounding off religious experience, these are general. The individual knows and understands the meaning of it, they are relatively common. That's actually quite important. Religious experiences are not uncommon, they're quite common. Maybe it's just because people hear what I teach and then they all of a sudden start telling me all their experiences. But I know at least 2 people that have had religious experiences. I could question them, I could... one of them was an elderly lady that said that she woke up and saw the Virgin Mary's statue next to her, and I can't remember what she said, but it was something like, I don't know if it talked to her or had a light around it or something. It could have just been the rising sun, she was quite tired, or she was even dreaming, so I could have easily made up another reason for it, but for her, she believed it, she understood it, she felt comforted by it. And at the end of the day, you could then use Freud against that and say it's just a comfort blanket. Who cares? We comfort blanket ourselves with far more other things in life. Why is religion the one that everybody seems to have such a bad issue with? People that have great conviction and often very consistent in their recollection. Liars forget. If you want to be a good liar, you have to have an amazing memory. Because otherwise, if you tell a lie, you then forget the lie, you'll get caught out. The thing with religious experiences are, people's accounts never seem to change. So they're either very, very good liars with very good memories, or they're telling the truth. People's stories do not change. Obviously, I'm generalising, of course, but in a lot of cases, the stories don't change. Often experienced by people who are not mentally ill on drugs, who are rational intelligence. Please don't say that everyone that goes to Toronto Blessing is mentally ill or on drugs. Thousands of people go to Toronto Blessing every day, and you are not telling me that every single one of them is mentally ill. Religious experiences is God taking an involvement in human affairs, so it's personal. He can't do it too frequently, otherwise it would jeopardise our free will. Problems, however, it could be drugs. We know that drugs cause side effects like hallucinations. Most occasions it's only ever the individual that undergoes them, not groups. And because they're emotional responses, they're personal, they can never be empirically tested. Everyone talks about this being differently, which is reliable, and they're spontaneous. You can never prove them because you can never capture them. They're not physical, they're private, they're individual. You cannot easily verify them. If you can't verify them, how can you communicate and discuss them properly? That's the 2 boxes, please. Take your time, there is quite a lot on that slide. 1 slide left and it's a nice easy one. Other than the soul, mind, body one, which we'll be doing on Friday morning, which again is quite a chunky one, the others we'll be able to get through very quickly. Teleological is a doddle, cosmological is a doddle. We'll be able to do them very, very quickly. This one is probably, other than body, mind, soul, as I've said, is the longest and the most dense. I will be very, very surprised if we go through a summer of exams without this cropping up somewhere, whether it's going to be in your main exam or whether it's going to be in the AS summer exam, the ones that aren't continuing. Religious experience is going to be there somewhere, I would imagine. Of course, I might be wrong. We've got nothing to go on. You are the first year through the main exams. But if they do ask a religious experience question, get ready for it because it really has marks written all over it. You could do so well with this.
How come you're the first year
doing this? What was last year?
So last year was the old spec still. So because the government brought in changes between modular and linear, modular meant that you could do an exam in January, you could do your resits, you do your AS when they still counted. Then the government thought, oh no, that's far too easy. Let's do it so they do one exam at the end of 2 years. So it was the government that changed it. It was then the exam boards that had to take this on board. So you're the first year through linear RS, whereas last year's history was the first year, so they're now into the second year. We've got to hope that the marking is fair and that it's quite on the nice side. The AS that was marked was certainly marked on the nice side. However, the questions you get might be awful. We don't know what the questions will be like. Don't forget, all philosophy is together. So you could get a religious experience question with a religious language question with a priori, posteriori questions, and they might word them really awfully, which is why we will prepare for it as much as we can. We'll do worst case scenarios and then we'll go back from there. Any question on religious experience is doable. There's no area of this that's hard. Every part of this is doable. I'm just going to bring on the last slide. I'll bring this slide back once we start the activity, so I'll bring this slide back if people didn't quite get it all down, so there's a lot on there. Final slide for the final box is basically that. You need to get that into the box that you have in front of you. You need to know your stories. So you need to know St Bernadette, St Teresa, Guru Nanak, Whirling Dervish, Toronto Blessing, Lords, Nicky Cruz, St Paul and Numinous. For each of them, you need at least 4 interesting facts about the story. These are things like Carol and John Arnott, Catch the Fire book, Nicky Cruz, New York Gangster, St Paul, Fish Scales, Ananias, Basket Over the Wall. You need to know things about them. If you tell them like a 5-year-old, the examiners will not be impressed. You have to know some things about it. You do not have to retell the stories in your exam. In fact, don't retell the stories in your exam, but you still need to be able to show the examiner that you're not just blagging your way through it. Second of all, you need a specific example, story or name. So if you want to talk about Numinous, and Numinous, you know you really like Numinous, Google it. Find a blog or an account that talks about it so you can reference it in your exam. Talking waffly about, oh, people that go to cathedrals get numinous. Oh, wow, let me give you an A for that. No, you have to get specific examples. You need a quote from their books. This is if you're going for the A's and the A stars. Get Catch the Fire. I've got all of these in the library. Nicky Cruz's books, Run Baby Run. St Teresa's got an autobiography. Even just Google them. Google quotes, St Teresa of Avila quotes, St Bernadette quotes, Whirling Dervish quotes. Find a quote, because that again is what differentiates and distinguishes your essay. Work out which ones are corporate, personal and conversion, how each of William James's 4 stages link to them, so how do they show transiency, passive, noetic quality, etc., and how psychology and physiology would explain them. If you go into the exam with all that under your belt, you'll walk it. It will be 40 minutes of writing joy. I might be slightly excessive there. But if you get them under your belt, you will be fine. Because if a religious experience question does come up, you will be competing with most of the country. That would be a popular question, so it means you need these things, otherwise you will struggle. If one of the things I will say to you nearer your exam when we do our last minute hammering is if you get a religious experience question, what I advise you to do first and foremost is write down William James's 4 criteria: noetic quality, transiency, passive and ineffability. If at the beginning of the question you think, oh my goodness, I can only remember 3, don't write the essay, because it won't come to you. Write another answer and then it might come to you. Never ever start a religious experience essay not knowing the 4. You will fail. Okay? You don't ever think, oh, an examiner just won't notice. Oh, they'll notice. FC Happold, FC Happold who? Don't care. The 4 for William James is what you must learn. So at the beginning, if you can't remember them, don't do the question.
What's WJ?
William James. Is there any questions about any of that? Anything on the PowerPoint, anything on religious experience that you're unhappy with? I'm happy to explain anything again. I'm happy to explain how any of it links to the questions, to the exam. Fabulous, well done everyone.